Hello. Welcome to another one of the Sunday programs of the Susan Mendez Foundation. We're so glad you're here. Today, we're talking about a very important subject, which is the unknown story of Arabs in North Africa who rescued Jews from the Holocaust. Who knew? Well, we have with us the world's expert on this story, Mr. Rob Satloff, who is the executive director of the Washington Institute for Near East Studies. He wrote the definitive book on this story. He is featured in the film that you've all seen. And for him, this whole story, this whole quest of how do we bring the West and the Arab world together started with the aftermath of the attacks of 9/11. And here we are now in another dangerous moment in history when the West and the Arab world couldn't be farther apart. And I think it's extra important for us to have such a story today, and for you to have this expert to whom you can ask all of your most burning questions about the Middle East in World War II and his thoughts today. Our other speaker is Professor Mordechai Paldiel, who was for almost 25 years director of the Department for the Righteous at Yad Vashem. He's on our board of directors. You've met him on many of our programs, and he personally handled one of the cases featured in Rob Satloff's film. We were supposed to have a third speaker, an Israeli ambassador named Nissim Tzvili. Unfortunately, he was unable to be with us because of the situation going on right now in Israel. And we wish him well, and we wish him his family well. So we're going to first start with Dr. Mordechai Paldiel, who will give some remarks. Then Rob Satloff will take over the program. Then Mordechai will give the second half of his remarks. And while they're making their remarks, please use the chat box. Put in all of your questions from the film or just things you were dying to ask. Put them into that chat box. I will be serving as your moderator today, and at the appropriate time in the program, I will be collecting your questions and asking them of our speakers. We do not recognize raised hands, so you will not be unmuted. You do need to type your questions out. So our first speaker will be Dr. Paldiel. Mordechai, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Olivia, and welcome everyone. We are meeting today, a day, I know what's on everybody's mind today, the situation in Israel, in Gaza, the Middle East, and we all hope that the results will be good for all the good people. And basically, before I get into the story of Tunisia, we all hope that the hostages that are kept by Hamas will be released alive and in fairly good health. That is our hope. I know negotiations are taking place, and let's all wish for good results. And now, today, this program, which has been planned months ahead, deals with a story that takes place in Tunisia, this particular story. And with one particular person by the name of Khaled Abdul Wahab. But look at the map where Tunisia is. It's in North Africa, and it's bordered by Libya and Algeria. Libya to the east, Algeria to the west. The story that we will be talking takes place in Mahdia, and near Mahdia, which is on the coast, you see. It's circled with red color. And the capital of Tunisia is Tunis on the top. And if you can see it on the slide, next to Tunis, a little bit to the left, is a very old, the remains of an old city, Carthage, which was once the capital of a large empire, the Carthaginian Empire. So we don't want to talk about this. But the Carthaginian Empire was a formidable foe of the Roman Empire. And one of the greatest generals in history, by the name of Hannibal, fought the Romans and defeated them battle after battle and after battle, but finally lost the war. So The military tactics of Hannibal are still studied today in military academies. The city was Carthage, of which there are no remains, only ruins, and that is in today's Tunisia. So just want to say, before the Arabs came to Tunisia, there were other civilizations, the Roman civilization, and before that, Carthaginian civilization of itself. And if you want to know more about that, then you Google the Carthaginian Empire, you'll get more information. So let's go to the next slide. And there was a large Jewish community. I mentioned before Jerba. This is one of the oldest synagogues, Sephardic synagogue on Jerba. Jerba is an island off the coast of Tunisia, and Jews have lived in Tunisia in Roman days, in Arab days, and then later on when Tunisia became part of the French Empire, and there are still Jews living in Tunisia, basically in the city of Tunis. And one of the oldest synagogues which has been preserved for hundreds of years is on the island of Jerba. And the Jewish people who visit Tunisia, they make it a point to drop over, to take a boat and go to Jerba and have a look. It's a functioning synagogue where prayers take place there on a regular basis. There were other synagogues in Tunisia, but most of them are no longer in existence because more Jews left Tunisia after World War II. But this is the main and the most prestigious and the best looking, still functioning synagogue in Tunisia. Next slide. So where is Tunisia? You see Tunisia, you see on the one side Algeria, Morocco, on the other side Libya, Egypt, okay? Libya was part of the Italian Empire. It was controlled by Mussolini's Italy. And there were Jews in Libya too, and some of the Jews in Libya suffered under the anti-Semitic laws, which were enforced by fascist Italy. Italy came out with its own anti-Semitic laws, not as horrific as the Nazi laws, but still very bad. And they were applied to the Jewish community in Libya. Most Jews in Libya survived because Libya was a battleground between the British and the Germans, back and forth in 42, in 41 and 42. One of the famous German generals was Rommel, legendary, also a great general. But anyway, the Germans had so busy fighting the British in Libya that they didn't have enough time to figure out what to do with the Libyan Jews, although they also suffered, they lived under severe restrictions. So that's Libya on the eastern coast of Tunisia. Next slide. Morocco and Algeria were part of the French Empire. It's very important to remember, most people don't know it. When France was defeated in 1948 by the Germans allowed the French to keep their empire. So they kept Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia as part of the French Empire. And as Shatloff wrote in his book, there were labor camps in Morocco, which were created by the Vichy authorities and where Jews were working in desert conditions to build basically a railroad track in Morocco. And many of them did not survive under these harsh conditions. So the anti-Semitic laws of the Vichy government, which were applied in Vichy France, were also applied across into North Africa, in Morocco and Algeria. There's a whole story about the king. There was a king in Morocco, Mohammed V, and he did not actually apply all the laws that came from Vichy. And Moroccan Jews consider him to be a good person who protected the lives, not the life, but the security and the welfare of the Jews in Morocco. Mohammed V, the king then, but the French were the final authority. They were in control. The same thing for Algeria and the same thing in Tunisia. Okay, the turning point, there was a lot of, in the campaign between the Germans and the British, moved into Egypt. The Germans advanced as far as Egypt in the summer of 1942, and then the British struck back in a battle very well known for people who are interested in World War II. It's the Battle of El Alamein in Egypt, not far from Alexandria. And the British won the battle, which began towards the end of October of 1942. And when the battle was over, after quite a number of days, the Germans retreated all the way out of Egypt and all the way across Libya. They gave up on Libya and they moved into Tunisia. And that's very important because we're talking about Tunisia. And so the German presence in Tunisia started in November of 1942. And at the same time, the United States appeared on the scene on November 8, 1942, when American troops landed in Morocco and Algeria. So they came from the other side. So the Americans and the British moved in from Morocco and Algeria. And then Vichy France broke off relations with the United States. They had relations with the United States until then. And the British moved in from the east. And so the Germans began to pour in more troops into Tunisia. Hitler had decided he was going to hold on to Tunisia. As you can see, Tunisia is not far from Italy. There's across Tunisia, you have the island of Sicily and then Italy. So it had strategic importance. It's a country in North Africa which is closest to Southern Europe and to fascist Italy. And so the Germans began to pour in a lot of troops into Tunisia, and they made an effort to hold off in Tunisia. And there starts the tragedy of German occupation of Tunisia, which lasted from November 42 until May 1943, almost 6 months. And there were 50,000 Jews in Tunisia. Next slide. And well, the Germans had plans for Tunisia, which we'll talk about this later on. If the German occupation of Tunisia would have lasted more than 6 months, who knows? They even had plans to deport the Jews from Tunisia across the Mediterranean into Europe and take them to concentration camps there. But they were not, it didn't work out because they were defeated by the Allies in May 1943. But in the meantime, Jews were forced to wear the yellow star, and Jewish men were forced to perform all kinds of manual labor, digging trenches and so forth, cutting down trees. And here we have a picture of Jewish men being let out for forced labor. Jewish businesses were confiscated. Jews were restricted in their homes. It was not a happy occasion for Jews in Tunisia, and the Jews were concerned that it could get worse if the occupation had lasted much longer. Next slide. And so our principal hero, a man who saved quite a large number of Jewish people, his name is Khalid Abdul Wahab. Khalid is his first name, Abdul Wahab is his family name. The man that was supposed to be on today's program, Nissim Zvili, and I talked to him on the phone on several occasions. He was born in Tunisia then, and he himself and his family were saved by an Arab family in Tunisia. He doesn't remember the name of that person because he was a child, small child, but there were good people in Tunisia. Tunisia is mostly in Arab countries. There were some Frenchmen, some Italians, but it's mostly in Arab countries. And there are stories of goodness which were done by Tunisian, by Arabs, as there are stories of good Arabs in Morocco, Algeria, and even in Egypt, of which we don't know very much. And that's good to point out also that goodness is not only restricted to the European continent, it can happen even across the sea. And there were Arabs that saved Jews during the German occupation and the Italian occupation, and that story needs to come out. Now, for more on Khalid Abdul Wahab, I turn the floor over to the man who discovered him, who discovered the story. Without him, we wouldn't even know about this. And that man is here on the panel. It's Dr. Robert Shatloff, and I turn the floor over to him to tell us more about this particular story. Robert, please.
Thank you very much, Mordechai. I'm really delighted to be with everybody today. I am grateful that you would take your Sunday to join Mordechai and myself with Olivia for this very important discussion. Khaled Abdul Wahab is a terrific story. It's a story that I fell upon. I mean, if you saw my movie, you saw some of the background to this. So I'm not going to give you all the detail, but I'll just tell you a bit more of the background that didn't quite come through, I think, in the film because we were under pressure to cut it down to 55 minutes. I had put notices around on every English, French, and Arabic website I could find, looking for people to tell me their family stories of what happened in Tunisia in 1942 and 1943. And I received all sorts of interesting responses back from people all over the world. But I received one special message time and time again from a lovely elderly woman who lived in Palm Springs, California, a woman named Annie Buchris. And she sent me a message that said, please, you have to hear my story. You have to. And she gave me one or two sentences about what her story was. And she just kept writing me, please listen to my story. And make it out to Los Angeles. And so what I did is I hired an interview from the Shoah Foundation, Spielberg's operation, to drive out to Palm Springs and to audio tape Annie Buchris telling her story. This happened, well, this has to go back now, 2002. And this audio tape produced a near 100-page transcript of Annie Buchris's childhood back in Mahdia. And eventually it got to the point of Annie Buchris telling what happened. Namely, she was a 12-year-old girl whose family was protected during the Nazi occupation when the SS came to her little town, protected on the farm of this larger-than-life Arab, young, handsome Arab notable named Khaled Abdul Wahab. A week after I received the audio tape in the mail from the interviewer in Los Angeles, in Palm Springs, Annie Buchris died. And I had this enormous feeling of responsibility that she died having finally been able to tell her story. And it was therefore my responsibility to find if that story was true, to put the meat on the bones of her story. And so you got a bit of a sense of this in the movie, where I went to her hometown and knocked on the door of Annie Buchris's childhood friends, people that she hadn't seen or heard from in 50 years at least, to try to find clues from her original taped interview, clues verifying that what she said was true. And as it turned out, to make this long story even shorter, it was all true. Her childhood friends validated exactly the minute details that Annie mentioned about what sort of trees were on the farm, when the family was taken by Khaled, how the family was transported in the middle of the night, these sorts of things. And then I found other members of the family who themselves validated Annie's original story. Annie's sister, Annie's cousin. And then, fortunately, I eventually found Khaled's side of the story. The young, dashing Arab rescuer eventually got married, had children, got married again, had children through another wife, and I found those children. Some of them were willing to tell their stories, others were not willing to tell their stories. But one terrific young daughter of Khaled Abdul Wahab was confirmed. Yes, my father told me. my father told me that on the farm, he protected Jews. He didn't make a big deal about it. It wasn't as though he considered himself, something special, but it was something that he carried with him. And so, as you saw in the film, it was truly one of the highlights of my life to be able to bring Khalid's daughter and Edmei Masliach, one of the survivors protected by Khalid, to bring them together for the first time meeting on the farm where Khalid Abdul Wahab saved about 20, as it were, 20 members of the extended Buchris family back in winter and spring of 1943. Look, let me put some of this in a bit of broader context. The whole point of what I tried to do was to show that yes, the Holocaust happened in Arab countries. Yes, for 3 years, Nazi Vichy fascist control of North Africa, more than 100 concentration camps, where everything happened in different degrees, in different ways, to the Jews of North Africa, that happened to the Jews of Europe, except for, and this is of course the biggest exception, except for extermination. But hostages, rapes, murders, abductions, slave labor, forced labor, confiscation of property, you name it. Everything that happened eventually in Europe, except the mass extermination of Jews, happened to the Jews of North Africa. And secondly, Arabs played a role very similar to the role that happened in Europe. The vast majority were bystanders, having no direct role. A regrettably large minority were perpetrators and participants, from the highest levels of government down to ordinary people who went door to door with the Nazis, pointing out which homes in Tunisia Jews lived in. And then there were a small, but I think powerfully important number of rescuers, protectors, people who saved Jewish lives. Actually, my theory, based on just looking at the numbers and doing a bit of the research, is that the proportions are almost exactly the same. That if you think about the number of Jews killed in North Africa, overall number total is about 4,000. You find about the same percentage of Jews, of Arabs who are rescuers per 4,000 as you do for the 6 million in Europe. Somewhere near 29,000 approximately rescuers at Yad Vashem recognized, about the same percentage, I think, in the Arab world. Now, I want to say right at the outset, I don't think Arabs are responsible for the Holocaust. I know some people have accused me of writing a book that suggests this. That's not the case. The Nazis, the fascists, the Vichyites, they're responsible. To say that they played a role is to bring them into the history, is to make this part of their history so that it is not a distant, faraway story of which Arabs played no part at all. Because I think it's very important. It's very important in today's context. Why does this matter? It matters because our global community is built in no small part on the ashes of the Holocaust. Human rights law, genocide law, the United Nations itself, all came to being as an answer to the Holocaust and to give the legal and political architecture to the concept of never again. Though denial and distortion, through denial and distortion, too many in the Arab world stand outside this architecture. Here, I'm not focused on those who know better, but on those who don't know enough. And the key question for me from the very beginning is how to break through that wall of purposeful ignorance. My idea was to engage Arabs in the history of the Holocaust in a way that makes it part of their history too. Indeed, that part of this is even a history of which Arabs can be proud. And through that, to make it a three-dimensional story of which Arabs play a role. And so in telling these stories, telling the stories of Khalid Abdul Wahab, and telling the story of some of the others that you saw in my movie, people like Ahmed Abdul Jalil, the hammam owner in Tunis, who protected a young man who was evading the SS Dragnet in December 1942, or the story of Si Ali Sakat, who opened the gates of his farm to protect 60 Jews who escaped from an Axis labor camp in early 1943. To tell these stories is, for me, a way to break down this barrier. I hope that these stories have had an impact. I believe that they have. I've spent much of the last 20 years traveling from Morocco to Dubai, showing this movie, telling these stories. It has been an eye-opening experience. The receptivity to these things is so much greater today in 2023 than when I started 20 years ago. Of course, we are at, as Mordechai opened, we are at a moment of inflection on just the same sort of issues that we faced when I first started this 20 years ago. Purposeful ignorance, purposeful efforts of blindness, keeping one's eyes closed to the horrors around us. I believe it's important to be as open and direct, compassionately, sympathetically, but directly with the people with whom we're trying to engage as possible. And so that's why I tell a fully three-dimensional story about bystanders, perpetrators, and rescuers, in the hope that through that effort, we can actually reach people. I realize as we look at the headlines today, this remains a very difficult challenge, but I remain hopeful and optimistic that if we speak directly, openly, honestly, that we can find people of goodwill and we can open some hearts and open some minds. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Now I want to turn over now to something that I am not too pleased to talk about. See, I worked at Yad Vashem for close to 25 years, and I work in a department called Righteous Among the Nations. That is, we seek out people who were acted in the best humanitarian tradition. That they risked their lives to save Jews from the Nazis, from the Germans and their collaborators. And most of these stories take place in Europe, because this is where it happened. This is where Germany is located. This is where Germany took control of most of other European countries. And this is where most of the Jewish population lived. Yes, there was a German presence in Tunisia, but it was short, 6 months. Yes, there was the Italian fascists in Libya. Yes, the French and so on. But as Rob pointed out, they didn't face actually extermination. It never happened there. Whereas in Europe, there was the Nazi policies led to extermination. But I worked at Yad Vashem, and Yad Vashem created in 1963 a program called the Righteous Among the Nations, in which it honors people that saved Jews. Not that they were forced to do it, but they did it individually. I mean, these are all individual stories. These are people who decided on their own that they were going to help and save some Jews. Most of the stories are of Jews that they knew from before a little bit, okay? They didn't stop on the street and say, are you a Jew? Come, I'll help you. No, it didn't happen like this, because for the simple reason that the Nazis threatened that anyone who helped a Jew would suffer the same fate as a Jew. So if you stopped a Jew on the street and somebody saw you that you are helping a Jew, you are placing yourself, I mean, it's not going to work out. You'll be arrested together with the Jew. So it had to do with people that you knew, and it had to be done in very secret ways and in very clandestine ways in order for it to succeed. Most people who help Jews help them by sheltering them, by hiding them in their home, or on their estate, on their property. Most cases. There are other cases of people helping them by giving them new identities or helping them to escape the borders and so forth. And then there are stories of people who helped children that Jewish families gave up the children in order for the children to be saved. And there were thousands of Jewish children that were hosted by non-Jewish families. Now that commission was created in 1963. And to give it the highest prestige, it was decided that the head of the commission would be a judge from the Supreme Court. And the first judge from the Supreme Court was, turn back to the first slide, please. The first one was Justice Landau. He's the man who was the head of the tribunal that tried Adolf Eichmann. You see on the picture here on the left, the third from the left, looking straight forward, that's Justice Moshe Landau. There were then about 12 members of that committee. It has, when I came to Yad Vashem, it had grown to 25 members. Next slide, please. Justice Landau left when he was nominated the president of the Israel Supreme Court. He was succeeded by another justice, Moshe Beisky, sitting here at the end. Moshe Beisky was saved in the Holocaust by Oskar Schindler. He's one of the Oskar Schindler people, as they call themselves, Oskar Schindler Juden. I always attended all the sessions of the committee. I was always there. In fact, I created the agenda. And I was always sitting next to the chair for the simple reason that when there was something unclear in the documents, the chair would turn to me and say, where's that document? Or that thing that appears in a certain language, which I don't know, in French, maybe you can tell me what it's there. So I was helping out the chair, and I was helping out the people that were sitting in the surrounding tables when they were studying each particular case. Next slide. Yes, next slide. Now, everything that was spoken, here's the third person that I worked with, Justice Yaakov Maltz. He was lucky, he left Poland before the war, and he worked as a lawyer and then became a Justice Supreme Court, and he has since passed away. All sessions of the committee were recorded by a stenographer, everything there, and typed up. So everything that was said there is on record for researchers and historians to be able to know how a case was, I would say, adjudicated, how it was decided based on the opinions and based on what people during that session knew about it, whether they knew the whole story or not, because they voted on it. Decisions were taken by vote. Next slide. While Yad Vashem was discussing this case, already Rob took the first step. He lives in Washington, D.C., as you probably know. And in 2008, I had left Yad Vashem, and he belongs to his congregation, Adas Israel, in Washington, D.C. And he decided to organize a ceremony to honor this man, Khalid Abdul Wahab, of which he had spoken, and by inviting his daughter, Faiza, who lived in Paris, and Nadia Bijou, who is the daughter of Ani Bukhrit, the person that was mentioned by Rob. And there was a nice ceremony attended by the Tunisian ambassador, I remember. And then we went outside, and there was a little garden there, the synagogue garden, and we unveiled, or we planted a tree in the name of Khalid Abdul Wahab. That was in 2008, while Yad Vashem was still debating the merits of this case. And I had retired. I was in New York. I was working for an organization called Raoul Wallenberg International Foundation. And I flew into Washington on the invitation of Rob, and I participated, and I was there present at the ceremony in the synagogue. Next slide. But then what happened was, this is a photo that I took with my camera of a vote that is taking place by the committee, by the 20 or 22 members. What happens was, at the end of a debate where all the opinions are expressed, the chair would say, all right, let's vote. Who is in favor? Raise your hands. And then the chair would say, Dr. Paldiel, please count. And then who is opposed to that, raise their hand. And so by majority vote, the decision fell. The decision was taken. If the majority was favorable, that person was recognized as a righteous among the nations. If the majority vote was negative, then it went the other way. If it was a split decision, then the case was then taken up at the next, the following commission session for people to think it over. And so everything was decided by a majority vote. So what happened here? I was no longer at Yad Vashem. I have to say something about myself. I don't like to brag about myself. But when I was in the commission, usually the chair would ask me, Paldiel, what's your opinion? When I gave my opinion, I knew I had about a third of commission members who would vote it according to my opinion. I mean, because I knew each case inside out, because I presented the case. I created the agenda. So I knew the merits and the demerits of a case. So I had some kinds of pull. That doesn't mean that every time my opinion was accepted. No, but I was no longer there when this case was. I regret now that I left Yad Vashem. Should have postponed my departure for Yad Vashem a few months later, so I could attend that commission session. But it was not up to me to leave. There were other factors there at Yad Vashem which caused me to leave. But I was no longer there. So when we learned, me and Rob, that Yad Vashem had declined, we were really shocked because it was quite obvious that the case met all the conditions for the title of Righteous Among the Nations. But then I realized, and Rob too, you see, most commission members, they come from Europe. Not most, practically all of them. And they know one comes from Hungary, some come from Poland, one from France, one from Holland, et cetera, et cetera. They know the situation in Europe during World War II. Very much familiar. You don't have to educate them. When it comes to North Africa, to Tunisia, they don't know. They don't know what happened there. And their opinion is that there was no Holocaust in North Africa. Yes, there were Jews felt a little bit uncomfortable. Yes, they couldn't, they had to shop only during certain hours and not other hours. Yes, maybe they were forced to perform some labor, but that's as far as it went. So the whole program of Righteous Among the Nations does not apply to the situation in North Africa. Well, they didn't know that in Tunisia, especially in Tunisia, the situation there was much worse than in any other North African country. Northward, a man by the name of Walter Rauf, the man who invented the vans, the gathering of Jews in vans in Poland, and it says he came to Tunisia to start to organize the Jews, to prepare them for possible deportations to Europe, and to force the Jews, to demeaning jobs and so on. So the situation was potentially getting worse and worse and worse. But thanks God, the Allies liberated Tunisia. But there was a sort of not a Holocaust, not an extermination type of Holocaust, but there was a very severe type of Holocaust in the making, but it never progressed beyond a certain point. So most members are not familiar with that history of North Africa. And that's why they were led to vote negatively. Now, I wasn't there, and the minutes that are recorded verbatim are not released. We asked to release to see how the rapporteur, they call it referent, the man who presented the case there, how he presented the case. Was he a prize? I know who the man is. He's a friend of mine, and he was born in Poland, and he knows everything about Poland. About Tunisia, I don't think he knows anything very much. But he presented the case, and we don't have accents to how the other members of the committee expressed themselves when they took the vote. So Yad Vashem surprisingly declined to award the righteous title to Abdul Wahab. The main argument was the lack of risk to his life, which is the essential criterion for the righteous title. The commission stated that as much as his deed was admirable in protecting his Jewish guests on his farm, he broke no law. There existed no regulation or law forbidding Abdul Wahab from hosting Jews on his estate, and he therefore faced no risk to his person. The Jewish women stayed on his farm with the full knowledge of the Germans, while their menfolk continued their forced labor service under German supervision. Edmi Maslia, one of the women, tells that the Germans would come from time to time to Abdul Wahab's estate to check if all the Jewish fugitives were present, at which time they would store the yellow star on their clothing. Now, the argument that there was no law which stated that it's forbidden to shelter Jews, that is also true for France. That is also true for Belgium. There was no law in Belgium stating it is forbidden to shelter a Jew in his home. And yet, those that were carted off to concentration camps. So the argument that there was no law, that in France too, there's no law in France under Vichy, under the German, which stated explicitly, it is forbidden to shelter a Jew. Yes, there were such laws in Poland. Yes, there were such laws in Ukraine. And I'll tell you what you don't know, even in Germany, there was no law which stated explicitly it's forbidden to shelter Jews. There were laws that it's forbidden to fraternize with Jews, but not to shelter Jews. Even inside Nazi Germany, there was no such law. So that argument is applied to Tunisia, strangely. So, countering this argument, it seems to me that the fact that some Germans, especially of the military medical team that was stationed nearby, knew that Jews were staying in his home, does not remove the potential risk for Khalid from other Germans, but even heightened it, such as from those associated with the Gestapo and the SS. The Gestapo and the SS were in Tunisia too, they had come. Who is to deny the risk factor which the Germans in full control and in the process of reducing the Jewish population to slavery and pauperism as a first step to even harsher measures? As pointed out by Sattler, did he not risk questioning and possible interrogation or arrest by the Germans who controlled Tunisia? Why cannot therefore claim that he benefited from a guaranteed safe risk from arrest? One could even make the counter argument that once a group of Germans discovered the presence of Jews in his home, it would have been more prudent for him to remove the Jewish women in order to eliminate the potential risk of arrest. Yet he kept them there until liberation. Okay, so the case then, me and Sattler, we pressured Yad Vashem, and so they turned it over to another justice, a justice of the Supreme Court, to be an arbitrator. And he studied the case. His name is Theodore O.R. And that was in 2015. And he came out with, he issued a statement, quite interesting, and I will read it. He said, the commission got it wrong. When the commission stated that there was no danger of deportation and consequently there was no need to hide, that has to be erased and replaced by the following. Tunisian Jews, I'm quoting now the Justice Theodore O. Tunisian Jews were indeed in danger, but that danger never reached to the actualization of deportations to the death camps like in Europe, because of the short time of the occupation, they were not able to deport the Jews. Although this was the real intention of the Germans, and for this purpose, Rauf, the SS officer Rauf, arrived in Tunis, and he was to organize the wiping out of the Jews in Tunisia, end of quote. One may consequently argue that the Jews in Tunisia could not foresee how long it would take the Allies to liberate them. At the same time, with the presence of Rauf and his SS team, Jews had everything to fear of a soon-to-be deportation, especially as the Germans had already taken the first step of forcing Jews meant to perform labor. And then how about the risk factor? The basic criterion for the righteous title, risk. That is an indispensable basic criterion. Well, the chair of the commission, Moshe Beisky, he was the chair of the commission for 20 years. He pointed out, when we talk about risk to life, it doesn't imply that a rescuer was facing a hangman's knot when he or she extended aid to the Jews. The very fact that in aiding Jews, a person was placing himself in jeopardy of possible eventual punishment or even of severe harassment by the authorities was sufficient reason to fulfill the risk requirement. That's Beisky. In other words, when we say risk to life, it doesn't mean that you knew you were going to be shot. In fact, in France, at Yad Vashem, we honored thousands of Frenchmen. No Frenchman who was caught hiding a Jew was taken out and shot or hanged. Not even one case. Some of them were sent to concentration camp when it was discovered that they were involved in a larger operation of hiding large groups of people. In other cases, they were given a slap on the hand and then released and sent home by the French Vichy authorities. There's not one case in France. And I speak that because I worked in that department. There's not one case where a Frenchman was sentenced to death and executed in France because they found a Jew in his home. So that is but that severe requirement is applied to Tunisia. And so since in Tunisia, Jews did not face immediate deportation, and since there was no law saying it's forbidden to hide Jews, and since no Tunisian man was ever executed when they found a Jew in his home, the committee then voted that this case does not belong on the table, on the agenda of the commission, which is totally wrong. That, you know, if you know the story of Abdul Wahab, that when he spirited out a large group of Jews from a dysfunctional oil workshop in Mahdia, where they had been enclosed, and he spirited them out in the midst of the night to out of a city estate like 30 miles away, and sheltered them there for many weeks in a country under direct German control, and with thousands of Jews conscripted for forced labor. He had definitely placed himself at the potential risk of punitive measures from the Germans, even if some of them knew of the presence of Jews in his estate. We have at Yad Vashem, and you have to take my word for it, we have many stories of Germans who sheltered Jews in their workshop with the full knowledge of the Gestapo. We had a case of a German that we discussed a few weeks ago, who kept a group of blind Jewish people working in his brush and broom factory in Berlin with the permission of the Gestapo. Even Oskar Schindler, the famous Oskar Schindler, kept 1,000 Jews in his factory with the permission of the Gestapo, the SS. He even paid them for each Jew 7 marks a day. So the very fact that it is claimed that some Germans knew that Abdul Wahab was keeping 25, 30, 40 Jewish women on his farm, that doesn't mean that he was in risk. There were many stories where the authorities knew that people were holding Jews, and somehow they overlooked it, or they had an excuse for why it was done for this and that reason. So the conclusion of the commission, I'm very sorry I wasn't there. I would have corrected it, and I would have brought them examples from other cases which are similar to that. And Abdul Wahab would have been passed not by a majority, but by a almost unanimous vote, almost. Yeah. Because the case is so strong and so powerful. There was a story which Rob didn't say, but there was a story, even some Germans who they were drunk because Abdul Wahab hosted Germans in his home there, which was separate from the place where the Jews were hiding on his farm. And he got them drunk. There were some Germans that they went to that area where these Jewish women were hiding, and they began to shout, We know you are Jews. We know you are there. We're coming to get you. And they were frightened, these Jewish women. And suddenly Abdul Wahab came over and told the German, come back, come back. You're missing. I have some good drinks there. You don't want the other Germans to, to finish the bottle. Come. And so there was that potential danger which existed during that incident. And so Yad Vashem is overlooked that. And as much as me and Rob, we tried, it didn't work out. But now there was a new chair. Yad Vashem also, the man that was in charge there, Avner Shalev, is no longer there. That man also, he had a very terrible ego problem, but he's no longer there. And hopefully, and I'm sure that one day this will be corrected, because there were quite a number of cases at Yad Vashem, which Yad Vashem decided one way, and then years later, new information came out, or the case was reopened, and the decision went the other way. And I am sure that Khaled Abdul Wahab will appear on the list of the righteous of Yad Vashem. It will appear, not eventually, but very soon.
Great. Thank you, Mordechai.
And now I'm turning the floor over to Dr. Olivia Mattis, the president of the Susan Mendes Foundation. Take it.
We are running long, so I do hope there's time for audience questions. I very much want there to be. So maybe the audience will agree to stay just a few minutes later so that people will get their questions answered. So do continue putting your questions in the chat box. Right now, I'm going to do some brief announcements, and then we will have a trailer for an upcoming program. So there are 2 more programs in 2023. Next week, we have not an uplifting story, but a very disturbing film. I'm warning you now. It's called Who Shall Live and Who Shall Die? And it has to do with whether the United States could have stopped the Holocaust. And it's basically a series of interviews with members of the FDR administration. These were interviews done in the 1970s when these people were no longer in power, but they were still alive. And it was a young, recent graduate. His name is Larry Jarvik, who had a microphone, which he put in their face and said, "Why did you do nothing?" So it was a very controversial film when it came out. We have Larry with us next week, along with Raphael Medoff, the world's expert on the US response to the Holocaust. You won't want to miss that program. It is a free program, but I'm just warning you that it's not uplifting. You'll leave that film angry. I've seen that film many times, and each time it makes me mad. In 2 weeks, or not in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from now is Thanksgiving. The following week, first Sunday in December, will be our last program of 2023. And there we are honoring this extraordinary couple, Serge and Beata Klarsfeld, who are famous Nazi hunters. And I do urge you to sign up for that program. There are 3 levels of tickets. And one of the levels is season tickets, which allows you to attend all of our programs in 2024. You can reserve them all in advance by getting a season ticket. So you can sign up at that level or just sign up for the program itself. And if money is a concern, we do have a sponsor. So we're very grateful to her. And if you are in need of a free ticket, please send us an email saying need a ticket, and the ticket will be yours. So right now we're going to show you a little trailer for the film Klarsfeld, A Love Story.
Nous avons réussi à être efficaces parce qu'on était heureux. On ne pouvait pas faire ce que nous avons fait en étant malheureux.
Beate Klarsfeld, vous avez décidé de consacrer votre vie et vos efforts à la recherche d'hommes ou de femmes qui sont, depuis la dernière guerre, considérés comme des criminels.
Enfin, pas toute ma vie, mais en principe, c'est contre l'antisémitisme et contre l'impunité des criminels de guerre que pendant des années, ensemble avec mon mari, nous menons un très dur combat.
27 janvier. Ben, je pars à Auschwitz. Le 27 janvier. Toute notre existence, à Beate et à moi, Beate, eh bien, elle représente le peuple ou l'État qui nous a persécutés, mais elle est allée en sens inverse. Moi, je n'aurais rien pu faire sans elle, elle n'aurait rien pu faire sans moi. Ça a été une œuvre individuelle d'abord et puis une œuvre collective ensuite. On commence par ici. Ici.
You've devoted your whole adult lives to this extraordinary work. But I want to take you back to romance. The two of you met in Paris, I believe, after the war. You're a German, you're a Holocaust survivor, Serge. Your father was killed in Auschwitz. How did you meet and what attracted the two of you to each other?
Being a neo-Nazi is not a fine person. It's a threat to civilization, okay? And so that's why what their work, which was of vital importance, is still of vital importance because it tells the world this is unacceptable. Racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism is unacceptable. Neo-Nazism is unacceptable. Nazis were unacceptable. Neo-Nazis are unacceptable. I think that's why this work, the work of history, making sure people understand the true history, the true facts, what really happened, is vitally important.
Okay, so now let's get to audience questions. So Rob, have you shown your film in Israel? And I'm sure you have. Can you tell us the reaction there?
Yes, so the film has been shown a number of times. I remember very well showing it. The American ambassador asked me to show it to a group of Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. It was a very moving screening. I remember very much a young Arab Israeli girl coming up to me afterwards, explaining to me that how empowering it was for her to see that Arabs during the war had agency, that they could make a choice. Some made a choice for rescue, some made a choice for perpetrator, but the most important thing is they made a choice, which was very validating for her, she said to me, because it only confirmed for her that they could make a choice today, given their current politics. Just this year, Israeli educational television in Arabic made a half-hour biographical documentary just of Khalid Abdul Wahab, which I thought was terrific, specifically shown on the Arabic television in Israel, and I'm told that it did very well, very popular. So I'm quite gratified that it gets this sort of airing in Israel too.
This is a question for either one of you, which is, what about other Arab rescuers? Has anybody been honored by Yad Vashem who would fall under that category?
I just want to answer not about Arab, but the Muslim rescuers. Yad Vashem honored quite a number, several dozen of Muslim rescuers from Bosnia and Albania. Now, these are Muslim countries. They're not Arab, but they practice Islamic religion. And many of them were honored by Yad Vashem. The Germans were there. It was for a certain time, the Germans, it was originally under Italian occupation, but then when Italy surrendered in September 43, the Germans took over, and the Jews were in danger. And the local population, many of them, in fact, in Albania, have the record that there were more Jews there at the end of the war than at the beginning of the war, because many refugees fled into Albania, into Muslim Albania, because the Albanians, they sheltered people who sought refuge in their country. They had that tradition of helping people who were being persecuted. And so most of the Jews in Albania, I say most, I mean not like 95%, survived the 1-year German occupation. Albania was a Muslim country mostly. It's like 85 to 90% Muslim, some Christians. But the story of Albania was not known because of the brutal communist dictatorship that followed there for 40 years, the Hoxha dictatorship.
But what about the Arabs that Rob has been studying? What
about the Arabs? I think Rob knows more about this. Yad Vashem has honored one Arab who was a medical student. He was living in Berlin, and there he saved a Jewish person, but he was originally an Egyptian. But for Arabs in Arab countries honored by Yad Vashem, I'm afraid we still don't have anyone.
Right.
If I'm mistaken, Rob, please correct me.
No. So your final comment is absolutely correct. So there's been nobody recognized by Yad Vashem for rescuing, no Arab recognized for rescuing a Jew in an Arab country. One that Mordechai is referring to, his name is Dr. Muhammad Hilmi. He was an Egyptian physician in Berlin who protected a Jewish girl and her family in Berlin during the war. And his family eventually, a member of his family eventually accepted the recognition that Yad Vashem finally gave to them after originally rejecting it. But that's the one Egyptian, but again, it's a separate type of story because it doesn't reflect an understanding and an acceptance of the fact that what happened in Arab countries itself was worthy of rescue and therefore worthy of honoring.
So here's a question from someone who notices that in the film, you're speaking with the grandson of a rescuer.
Mm-hmm.
And this grandson is reluctant to have any sort of public ceremony. Can you flesh that out for us a little bit more?
Yeah, so this entire issue is a very complicated political topic in Arab societies. So I think the questioner is referring to the offspring of Si Ali Sakat, who is this Tunisian gentleman who opened his farm to Jews escaping from a labor camp in the middle of the fighting. And so I went to the farm. I found grandchildren of Si Ali Sakat. This was a well-known story, actually. It's not as though I did such a brilliant job of research. It was published in books that were printed in Tunis after the war. Okay, maybe I was the first person to popularize the story, but it was there. And so the grandchildren did not deny it, but it was such an alien story to them. Actually, the fascinating thing was in their family, a totally different story was told, not about the grandfather opening the gates of this farm to protect Jews escaping from the Germans. But in their family, the story was told of the grandfather opening his farm to protect German POWs who escaped from an Allied POW camp. It was totally inverted. No proof whatsoever about that story. Lots of documentary evidence to support the story of Jews who escaped. Why? Because it became toxic in Tunisia and Arab societies more generally in the 60s and the 70s to even conceive of protecting Jews. Jews became synonymous with Zionists, and this melding of these stories, pre-war, post-war, Jews, Zionists, Israel, it became toxic. And so one of the grandchildren wanted to have nothing to do with it, and another with whom I met said he'd be proud to have his grandfather honored. That's exactly the sort of complexity that exists in Arab societies in trying to disentangle this history for people today.
Okay, I think since we've run over the hour, I'm going to now turn to the final thoughts. So Rob, what would you like to say in closing to our audience today?
Look, the only thought I'd like to leave people with, it really tries to bring this history to where we are today. The last 5 weeks have been, for me, extraordinarily heartbreaking on many levels. For the obvious reasons, the lives lost, the hostages taken, the innocent civilians killed. It's a heartbreaking situation. On another level, for me, as someone who's spent the last 20 years trying to talk with Arabs about recognizing history, about recognizing their role in history and not denying or distorting history, and as someone who thinks that we've made some considerable progress, recognizing official recognition of Holocaust Remembrance Day in Egypt, in the Emirates, in Morocco, in Bahrain, in just the last couple of years, multiple times. Yet to still see that same sort of historical denial occur by the same people who opened their hearts, but seeing that historical denial occur in the last 5 weeks. Oh, nothing happened on October 7th. Oh, there's no evidence. Oh, where is the proof? Oh, it did not happen to. Terribly depressing. To me, it just confirms the importance of continuing this effort of trying to talk directly, openly, honestly about what happened then, what happened now, recognizing the complexity, but trying to bring Arabs into history, because so many want to stay outside of history. And you can't be a global actor in the 21st century if you stay outside of history. And so these challenges, even though it's 80 years after the fact, these challenges don't go away. We have to keep at it. That's my final word.
Mordechai, the final word goes to you.
Very hard for me after listening to Rob, what I can add. But what comes to my mind is, after working for 24 years at Yad Vashem and being instrumental in honoring thousands, literally thousands of people, when I found out a lot of these people saved Jews not because they were in love with Jews, not because necessarily they loved Jews, but because they were in love with themselves. They had compassion. Some of them even made anti-Semitic comments. Some of those people who sheltered Jews in their homes. I remember, just give you one example. A Polish man came to see me at Yad Vashem. His family had sheltered Jews, and he had planted a tree at Yad Vashem. He came to visit the tree, and then he came to bid me goodbye. He came to my office and he said, "Thank you. The olive tree is growing very well." And Dr. Paldiel, I have to tell you something. My family, they hate Jews, and they never asked the Jews, where did you hide your gold? I mean, we never asked them that question. We were not interested in their gold. We wanted to save their lives. And there's something else, Dr. Paldiel, I want to tell you. When I came to Israel to see the tree, and it was in April, my friends back in Poland told me, don't go to Israel in April because it's right before Passover. And they may use your blood to bake the matzahs, the ritual accusations. And I came and I went, and Passover passed, and I'm going back to Poland. And you see, Dr. Paldiel, nothing happened to me. So I'm going to go back to Poland, and I'm going to tell my stupid friends, you don't have to worry. The Jews, they no longer practice that killing of Christian blood for the matzahs. It's over. It's finished. And he shook my hands, and I shook his hands. And I said to myself, look at that, this family. And he's proud his family saved Jews, but he still has these anti-Semitic, these things, not out of hatred, but he repeats them. So compassion, love is a human attribute. And let's not forget that there also was a golden age in the history of Arab or Muslim Jewish relations under the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, and especially in Spain. And then let's not forget, when the Jews were expelled from Spain, the Turkish Sultan, the Muslim, invited the Jews, come over here to the Turkish Empire. We need people like you. And that started the flow of Jewish immigration to the Turkish Empire, with thousands of them choosing Tzfat, Safed, and Palestine, and then, what's known as Palestine, part of the Turkish Empire. And that created the Kabbalistic community there of Luria and a whole host of mystic scholars. And on Friday night, when we sing L'cha Daudi, L'krat Kala, I mean, that's one of the songs of the mystics of Tzfat. And that was under the Muslim rule. So I'm not saying they were the best and the worst. At that time, the Christian countries were worse than the Jews. The first ghettos were established, and not in any Arab country. The first ghetto was established in Venice during the Renaissance. So all I'm saying, goodness is a human attribute, and we honor people who did good acts, not because they love Jews or that their personal feeling about Jews is of no consequence, but that they love the humanity, and they felt that every person has a right to a decent life. And I'm sure that there are many Arabs in the Arab countries, in Tunisia, in Morocco, even in Libya, yes, where all the fighting took place, that sheltered Jews, like those who sheltered Nissim Zvili's family, for the simple reason that they felt that these people had a right to exist, and they were going to participate in it, not because they knew they were going to get a medal from Yad Vashem and a tree at Yad Vashem. No, because they felt that this was an obligation that they had to fulfill. So the more we bring out such stories, and I'm sure that they are quite more than just one Arab story of Khalid Abdul Wahab. There must be more. I'm not saying there were millions of such stories, no, but there are many more. And hopefully this will maybe create a better political climate too. And hopefully a way will be found between the Arabs and Jews somehow to solve that problem, which is mainly not a religious problem, not a social problem. It is mainly a political problem, and political problems can be solved.
Well, wow, what an hour and a quarter. So thank you to our fabulous, knowledgeable, enlightening speakers. Thank you to our patient, loyal audience that stayed a quarter hour after and that comes to us week after week. Please sign up for next week's program. One more thing, we do have this book available. Hanukkah is coming up, and it's an amazing story. We have the author who will give you a signed and inscribed copy of this beautiful book of the journey that saved the authors of Curious George. They were rescued by our hero, Aristides de Souza Mendes. So don't miss the opportunity to get this book for all of the young people in your life. Look forward to seeing you soon. Be well, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.